today. It's just raspy, you know. But yay, we're live. We are live. We are young. Heartache to heartache we stand. No promises, no demands. Love is a battlefield. Well, let's give it a couple minutes for people to show up. I wanted to talk, I better respond to this person really quick. Yes, you could. Yes, you could. I wanted to talk a little bit about Hermeticism today, or Hermetism as it's typically called by scholars now, which really isn't necessarily one thing. Although, the one thing it is one, if not the foundational philosophy behind astrology. I have my giant coffee here. My giant coffee. Let's give it a couple minutes. I'm on just a few minutes early, you know. Time is never time at all. You can never ever leave without leaving a piece of you. I'm on just a few. Oops. And our lives are forever changed. We will never be the same. The more you change, the less you feel. Believe in me. Believe. Oh, now we have people. That life can change, that you're not stuck getting by. We're not the same, we're different. Tonight. Anyway, how's everybody feeling today? I was going to do a little talk about Hermeticism or Hermetism, right? Which is one of, if not the foundational philosophy of astrology. And then we'll do chart readings. Then we'll do live chart readings, and it will be fun, and you will enjoy this. You will enjoy this, but it will not be over quickly because I talk way too fucking much. And I have my full thing of coffee today. You see, I have a big thing of coffee because I'm so fucking dragging. My girlfriend left at like midnight, you know. And we had a wonderful time, but I was dragging. Come join us. Come join us. Good afternoon, everybody. Everybody in the club getting tips. Right? Remember that song? Everybody in the club getting tips. You can give me some tips. Like the stream if you're watching on YouTube, and follow me if you're watching on Twitch. Although nobody's watching on Twitch right now, it doesn't look like. I should go and make sure Twitch looks okay really quick. And then I want to talk a little bit about Hermeticism. Or Hermetism. The tism. It's the tism. Let's see. Am I on here? Watch now. Why does it say I'm offline? Why does it say I'm offline on Twitch? I'm not offline. I should be online. Okay, I am online. Cool. Okay. Wonderful. So like I said, I wanted to talk about Hermetism. Yes? Which is one of the foundational, if not the foundational philosophy behind astrology. Now, if you've been watching me before, you know the zodiac first emerged from the Babylonian Empire around 420 BCE, right? And if you've also been watching, then you also know that Alexander the Great conquered a huge swath of land, right? Around 423 BCE, so right around the same time. And after that conquest, all these sort of disparate areas, that is, Greece, yeah, the Mediterranean, Egypt, right? Babylon or ancient Mesopotamia, and then all the way over to parts of India were sort of assimilated into what we call the Hellenistic world. And in the midst of that was a lot of religious and philosophical syncretism. Yeah. And that's the fertile ground out of which we saw Hermetism, or rather the Hermetic texts, emerge, you see. And so the Hermetic texts, what are these? Well, they're a corpus of writings dating back, some of them as early as maybe third or fourth century BCE. And then other ones sort of labeled as the philosophical Hermetica, perhaps later, the 2nd and 3rd century CE. And they seem to come out of this Hellenistic sort of world, right? It was like a melting pot of cultures, religions, and people, right? Lots of different countries. Well, they weren't really countries per se back then, but the Corpus Hermeticum, on the one, it was divided or has been divided by scholars artificially into what's called the philosophical, right, Hermetica, which is all about the cosmology and all that sort of stuff, and the nature of existence. While there's also, which is older, the technical Hermetica, which is about astrology, magic, and all these sorts of other, more technical subjects like timing and calendars and stuff like that. But it's not like a hard and fast division. There's philosophical stuff in the technical Hermetica, and there's technical stuff in the philosophical Hermetica, right? But what's interesting about all of it is the content, yes, but also the context. So a lot of it, like the cosmology, became foundational for lots of other philosophies too, ancient philosophies, right? So I own a copy of the Kybalion. Yeah, I read that when I was 20 years old, and it's not Hermeticism. It's just sort of like repackaged theosophy. I have it right here. Do I have my copy of the Hermetica? Here's the Kybalion. It says Hermetic philosophy, and it says by 3 initiates. It's likely that one of the so-called initiates was Paul Foster Case, right? The famous tarot student who was in the Golden Dawn, the second incarnation of the Golden Dawn, and then went on to establish Builders of the Adytum, the BOTA, which I did. I was in that group, and that's where I learned tarot, you see. So, but yes, the Kybalion is actually not really Hermetic philosophy, and it departs decidedly, and it goes off in its own sort of thing. But let me see if I have my copy of the Hermetica readily available. Oh. Oh. I should have had it out. Let me put my skirt down. Choo, choo, choo. What the hell is it? I can't find it right now, but the best version that I found was edited by people named Freak and Gandhi. Anyway, I'll have to show you. I'll show you the good one to get. And really, everyone should have a copy of it if you're going to study astrology, because it's all about the point of astrology, the purpose behind astrology. Where's my web browser? Where's my web browser? Ah! caw, 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 caw. I don't know why I'm doing that. Where's my web browser? Here it is. Here she comes. Hermes Trismegistus. Let's go to Hermetica Freak. Timothy Freak, right? And Peter Gandy. Let me go to an image. Here we go. Let me see if I could put this up on the big board. On the big board. There we go. Why isn't that showing up? Properties. Why aren't you showing up, homie? Properties. Why does this shit do this? Like, just fucking work, yo. There we go. So, see if I can, oops. So you see it there, right? The Hermetica, the lost wisdom of the pharaohs. It's edited by Timothy Freak and Peter Gandy, right? This is what you should be doing more so than looking at the Kabbalion, because the Kabbalion is sort of a misrepresentation of Hermetism, right? So why do we call it Hermetism, though? Why do we call it Hermetism? Well, because the corpus of writings are attributed to a mythical figure named Hermes Trismegistus, which means Hermes the thrice great. Not just once great, not just twice great, but thrice great. It's a lot of greatness, isn't it? It's very great. But you see, Hermes Trismegistus as a figure was mythical. A lot of people in occult circles, take him to be a literal thing, just like, Christians would do in their own sort of, in their own sort of context. But Hermes Trismegistus was born out of that same synchronistic period in the Hellenistic age. So once again, between, say, 420 BCE and more or less like 320 to 350 CE, right? When Christianity started to really become dominant. So Hermes Trismegistus was a syncretic amalgam, right? A mixture, a conflation of two gods. Number one, the Greek Hermes, right? Who was the messenger of the gods, who led people, through the underworld and such like that, right? And then Thoth, right, in Egypt, was also a god of writing and communication, sort of like Hermes it was and is, right? But also the god of the occult and hidden things. His head was an ibis bird. You may recognize it in Egyptian art, correct? I need to get this box off of here. But the two became conflated into one being, known as Hermes Trismegistus. And Alexandria, Egypt, was sort of the epicenter of a lot of this stuff, right? Of astrological research. You had the Ptolemaic dynasty, right? The dynasty, right? You might know Cleopatra. She was part of that dynasty that sort of ruled Egypt for the final years of the Hellenistic era. Yeah. And it was also sort of a place of pilgrimage for a lot of people back then. Today, especially in the 1960s, you had a bunch of Westerners going to India to discover ancient hidden wisdom and sort of fetishizing it. Back then, you had everyone going to ancient Egypt, right, to get their hidden wisdom. And there was sort of like an industry or a tourist business of Egyptian priests, right, who would give sort of these transcendent experiences. But Hermetism itself, like I said, is not one thing. There's a bunch of sort of disparate and sometimes contradictory ideas in the various writings, right? The corpus of writings that we call the Hermetica. Yes? But what is interesting that runs through it is the cosmology. Yes? And the idea that the point of life is for the human soul to reunite with its source. That in man or humanity is the union of both spirit and matter, which creates this dual being, right? It's like Madame Blavatsky once said that humans are gods in animal bodies. And you can see how this really is derivative of Hermeticism or the Hermetic teaching. Now, what we have to appreciate too is the Hermetic teaching is derivative of Platonism. In fact, you could say like all of Western occultism and spirituality is derivative of Platonism in some way. The idea that souls, human souls, consciousness descends from the divine realm and then takes on form or matter. And then through a process of a series of realizations or what we could call initiations, the soul seeks and labors to reunite with its source, which in Hermeticism or Hermetism is known as Atum, or God the Father. And we see this sort of, this cosmology or this philosophical context mostly detailed for us in a Hermetic text called the Poimandres, which is sort of like a catechism or a dialogue, right? Between Hermes and Poimandres, which is sort of a representation of the mind of God. So he's learning, right, through this process of dialogue. But it's not like Socratic dialogues, which are sort of like a mutual investigation, right? The Hermetic dialogues are more catechisms, where there's sort of a question answer, and you're being sort of told, right? Or you're being taught, essentially. So what's interesting about the different contradictions that people may notice between Hermetic texts is that what this really represented, Hermetic teaching in general, was an initiatory system. That is, by initiatory, we mean graded steps that were meant to confer greater realizations, more knowledge, and a greater understanding. You see? And you can see the same sort of structure. You can see the same sort of structure, the catechism, the initiatory progress, right? Various degrees and all that sort of thing. You can see this replicated in the initiatory organizations of today. Whether it's Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, all these things that more or less came out of the 18th and 19th centuries. Right? Theosophy. Yeah? Theosophy is mostly the basis of modern astrology, for better or for worse. And I typically say for worse. But Theosophy itself is heavily influenced by Hermetic teaching. And a lot of that stuff we take for granted. Even reincarnation. The idea of the transmigration of the soul. Yes? Yes, the soul is working to reunite with its source. Yes? However, right, this is also a process of releasing oneself from the world and from matter and all that sort of thing. Correct? So, the general idea of reunion isn't totally new, but it's the central fundamental point of Hermeticism, and really of all Western occult and spiritual philosophy. which is derivative of that. And then Hermeticism, as I said, is also derivative of Plato and Platonism, which posited a very similar cosmology. You see, there was the realm of the 7 planets, yeah? In the Hermetic texts, Hermes Trismegistus is quoted as saying that we are governed by fate, right? And fate is distributed by the stars, by the planets, yes? And each of the planets, and planet means wandering star, each of the planets represented a deity. Now, this was sort of particular to the Hellenistic world because in ancient Mesopotamia, it wasn't necessarily like that. However, this was sort of the Platonic model, which then became the basis for Hermetism and a lot of the Hermetic philosophy, or at least that's what scholars surmise. But the other thing scholars say, and I really suggest that you follow 2 YouTube channels. Number 1, Religion for Breakfast, which I just watched, the Hermetic episode yesterday and today. And that's what inspired me to talk a little bit about this. But also there's another channel called Esoterica by Dr. Justin Sledge. And he is a legit scholar of religion and philosophy, you see? So what he mentioned is that modern scholars are finding more and more connections within the Hermetic writings to Egyptian philosophy, which would make perfect sense, yes, because we were seeing the syncretic intersection, right? And commingling of Egyptian and Greek philosophy, right? Which gave rise to Hermes Trismegistus and therefore the Hermetic teachings, yes? So yes, it's sort of a union between, the Greek sort of philosophical context and the Egyptian, right? And then you even bring in some of the Indian too. Buddhism, right, even came to ancient Greece during the Hellenistic age, you see? And, Buddhism is sort of anti-theist in a way. But it melded very well with the Platonic philosophy, right? That essentially in the Hermetic sort of worldview, we're laboring to free ourselves from the desires of the material world, the world of fate, which is administered and ruled by the 7 traditional planets as deities. You see, human souls were said to come from the 8th and 9th circles of the fixed stars of the heavenly realms and descend through the material realms of the planetary spheres, the 7 planetary spheres. You see, that's Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Mercury, right? The sun and the moon. And the souls descended through all those spheres. And it was through that descent that it took on its material body and then incarnated in the world. We were said to take our flesh from the moon or the lunar sphere, you see. And so the idea is that this whole material realm is governed by fate. And there's not a fucking thing we can do about it. Unless we learn to slowly turn our attention to the initiatory work of reunion with our source, which also entails progressively turning away from material identification with the world of fate, right? We're governed by the law of death until we begin to free ourselves from it by slowly working consciously to discern our source and re-identify with it. So this is all very important stuff to understand because this is the foundation of astrology. As I said in the beginning, right? Humans are considered the intersection, right? A dual being where both spirit and matter are made manifest, right? The word made flesh. And this is why Hermeticism was sort of credited with discovering Christianity before there was even Christianity. The idea of God the Father, in reunion with God the Father. There was also the idea that the ineffable transcendent God the Father spoke the word, right? The logos, and spoke the sun, or that the logoic principle into existence, which we can see in the Christian context as the Father and the Son. And then there was the Holy Spirit, or the Creator God, known as the craftsman, right? Or the demiurge, that actually was the material creator of the world, you see. So it's very interesting that it's connected with a lot of the, you can see it as a precursor to a lot of the Christian ideology. But it's very important to recognize how this connects with astrology. Because if humans are the union of two aspects, right? Matter and spirit, then you look at this chart here, right? The first whole sign house is what? It's you, right? And the ascendant, descendant axis is the horizon, right? Everything below it was below the earth, or invisible. And everything above it was above the earth and the sky, and therefore visible. And as I've told you in the past, this bottom half of the chart below the horizon is called the north, right? The midnight place. And this bottom half, the dark half, had to do with things of the body and the flesh, you see. Things of the body and the flesh. While everything in the south half, up above, visible, had to do with things of the mind and the spirit. Therefore, the first house, which represents you, right, straddles the mind-body duality. Yes? Therefore, the first house is the union of spirit and matter. Because, right, the rising sign was the sign rising up over the eastern horizon as you took your first breath. And it was the first breath in ancient Greek philosophy, and a lot of them, right, in Platonic philosophy, when the soul actually entered into the body, right? At the first breath. And therefore, the first house, represents the whole you, mind, body, spirit, and came to represent your character. Yes? Now, Mercury rejoices in the first house. And you could say that's because Mercury is mind. And mind is sort of the definitive aspect in humans, right? That within humans, we have the spark of the divine mind of the Creator, right? And it's that spark within that is the means of reunion, right? But Mercury also straddles that sort of, Mercury doesn't belong to the benefics or the malefics. Mercury has a dual nature as well. Mercury is also sort of non-binary in a lot of ways. So it's very fitting, right, that Mercury represents Hermes Trismegistus and rejoices in the first house, which is what? The union of spirit and matter. So you see, the whole idea of astrology itself is founded on this cosmology. And the essence of astrology is the alternation between light and dark. And light is spirit, and dark is matter. So you see, the journey of the sun, right? The annual move, and the sun doesn't move, we know astronomically, but just roll with me here. This was the world view of ancient people, right? In Platonic philosophy, the world was a sphere, or the human world was a sphere, right? And everything else revolved around it, right? The planets and everything else. You see? So the idea is that the sun had this annual journey, which had to do with it ascending and descending, right? Increasing and decreasing in terms of light, right? The days get longer or shorter, right? The summer solstice is in the northern hemisphere where the days are the longest, while the winter solstice is where the days are the shortest in the northern hemisphere. Then the equinoxes is when day and night are equal. And we know astronomically now that that has to do with the Earth rotating on its axis as it orbits around the sun. But you see, this symbolism was central to all of astrology and Hermeticism. Because the idea was that this solar cycle, the increase and decrease of light, represented what? Initiation. That the movement of the sun represented the life of the sun god. Yes? As he went through these initiations in order to be reborn again after he died, right? And it's the same with humans analogically, that we are in this process, right, of becoming immersed in matter and then dying to it bit by bit as we reassimilate and re-identify with our source progressively bit by bit. And you can even see the symbolism replicated in the Christ story. It's very, very interesting. Hermeticism and the Hermetic teaching pervaded all the Abrahamic religions. In fact, it was sort of, it was part of the founding of Islam. You know, it was adjacent to Judaism. In fact, there was some Jewish philosophy that really came into Hermeticism, at least, you know, from the original scriptures. The idea of the word and all that, and the word, you know, all that sort of thing. But it was really, really erected upon Platonism. But the idea of fate that came out of this, the idea that fate was a thing, was anathema to Christianity and to Judaism, right? They didn't want to believe that the stars and all these things controlled our fate. So a big thing that came out of the Christian tradition was salvation through faith, not fate, faith, you know, that it was by the grace of God that we were saved, right? But that sort of takes all the effort out of it, doesn't it? So, and what's really interesting is that when Hermetic philosophy was by and large rejected in the Western Christian world, it was salvaged in the Byzantine Empire. Now, the Hermetic writings were sort of given a more Christian flavor by the Byzantines, but still a lot of it was retained, even though it was altered for a Christian audience. But then the Arab peoples as well safeguarded the Hermetic teachings. And the Arabs gave us a lot of what we understand about medieval astrology, like Abu Mashar, right? Very important figure in the history of astrology around the 7th century or so. 7th or 8th century, if I'm not mistaken. But you have to recognize how much Hermetic philosophy influenced the Abrahamic religions, of course, but also all the esoteric traditions in the West, all the sort of occult traditions that grew out of the Middle Ages on the one hand, and then the Renaissance on the other, and then finally from the Enlightenment, you know, in the 17th and 18th, the 18th and 19th centuries, the 1700s and 1800s. And magical philosophy is largely derived from all of it, the technical Hermetica, right? So it's important to understand where these things come from. And it's important to understand the foundational symbolism of astrology has its philosophical basis in the Hermetic cosmology and ideology about reunion with the source. And therefore, all these things are divided up into these artificial dualities. But at the center of it is the union of these dualities in humanity. And then the freedom from these dualities within the divine spirit, which is the eventual goal of all beings, you see. So, right, on the one hand, we can look at astrology and look at our charts, you know, to see, you know, who we're going to love and have sex with and where we're going to get our money. I love those things more than anyone. I love sex and money. Everyone knows that by now. However, the more important part of all this, the more important aspect of astrology, is that it's a tool for self-development. Adam Ellenboss, one of the few astrologers I follow, because I hate other astrologers. They're insufferable assholes, including myself. And they're usually very boring people, But, hi, Jazzy Dreamer, hello. But, what Adam Ellenboss says, that's completely correct in my view, is that the chart is a map of what you're not. It's a map of you within the realm of fate and flesh, right? And we've basically descended through the spheres as divine souls only to take on this body of flesh and matter and blood and dirt and soil, right? That became our mode of contact with the world. And that is the body that's governed by fate. And that's the body, the personality, the thoughts and feelings that are represented in your natal chart. You see? That's what we're reading in your chart. We're reading your body, your personal self, the self that is false, ultimately, the self that we've acquired in life, that we've taken on through these spheres, and we eventually have to transcend in order to reunite. And just like the Buddha said, that desire, right, is suffering in a way. It was more than that. But the Hermetic teaching says something very similar, that we're going to endure pain and suffering and loss and death in this material world until we begin to discern our source through effort, through grades of initiation, right? Initiation means expansion of consciousness. It's not adding anything new to you. It's entering into a greater understanding of your relationship with the rest of existence and therefore your creator. Yes. And you can't really do astrology if you don't understand this. Therefore, we look at the rising sign as representing sort of what we're here to do this life. Yeah. And we look at the sun as representing that spark of divine mind within us, you see. And therefore, you have to appreciate the chart as a means and a method of studying yourself. Because just as it's said over the Delphic oracle in ancient, sorry, I'm dyslexic in my brain. As it said over the Delphic oracle in ancient Greece, it said, man, know thyself. It's not just talking about just knowing, oh yes, I'm Saturn girl, I do live streams. It's not knowing ourselves. It's about understanding the source of consciousness itself and seeing for ourselves the unreality of this meat bag, or rather, the unreality of the sense of I that is emergent from it, right? The idea in Hermeticism, or Hermetism, was that God the Father created this logos, this proto-human, right? Which in the Jewish tradition was known as Adam, right? Or the Adam, whatever. So I'm not going to get into all that. But you see, this being, this proto-human, born out of the love of God, right, is participating in the creation, but then notices his reflection in the water of nature. And he desires to be part of that nature. And through having sex with nature, that fundamental union of man, the divine being, with nature, the material world, he began to be a part of it and participate in that, and therefore identify with it. And this can almost be seen as analogical to the fall of man, right? In the Adam and Eve story. And therefore, humans became material beings, the union of spirit and matter. And the rising sign represents in you that union of spirit and matter. That's why you have to appreciate the rising sun as being you, the union of you. So when I say, know thyself, investigate yourself, it's investigating that seeming duality of spirit and matter, of mind and form, mind and flesh within ourselves. And therefore, we're admonished to realize that they were never separate in the first place. That there may be this artificial duality, but everything in the end is motivated, moved, vitalized, and given life through the breath or the word of God, the Father, Atum, the divine, the transcendent God. Yes? So you see how this cosmology is all fundamental and inextricable from astrology, because astrology as a practice is erected upon all of this. So the reason I'm mentioning all this is, number one, because it's very interesting. But number two, whether we believe in God or not, because, I'm sort of open about being atheistic at this point. But whether we believe in it or not, the whole point is to understand the source of consciousness and how it arises. It's to investigate that sense of I or of me, which in the end is an effect of spirit misidentifying with the body. Yes? And taking ourselves just to be a body. Are you just a body? I don't know. Go find out. I know a little bit for me because I've been doing this work for 20 some odd years. And you probably have too, a lot of you. But this always bears repeating. So anyway, if anyone wants a reading now, I thought that was all useful stuff to talk about. And I was inspired from watching a couple other different YouTubers talk about this. And I've been studying the Hermetica for a while. I mean, I started off with the Kybalion like a lot of you did. And like quantum function mentioned in the beginning of this. I started with the Kybalion. I thought this shit was like the bomb, when I was 20 years old. But there's a lot of nonsense in it. And we won't get into that necessarily. But you get a lot more out of reading the Poimandres of the Hermetica. Yeah? Excuse me. Because it outlines this cosmology. And I've been a Freemason for 18 fucking years. And I can tell you, reading the Hermetica, I see so many parallels. So many parallels. That's why I really think that Freemasonry owes its genesis back to the Hellenistic era, especially the syncretism between ancient Greece and ancient Egyptian philosophy. Because you also see a lot of this astrological stuff in ancient Egypt in terms of the decans and all that sort of thing. You see, they were also tracking the movement of the sun, just like they were in ancient Mesopotamia, and then which became the basis for what we know as ancient astrology, you see. So anyway, please let me know. Oh, yes. Yeah, this is interesting stuff. But if y'all want readings now, my passion is very inspiring. Hands, yellow, heart, red. Yeah, I know, I'm very passionate. My girlfriend yesterday was saying, you're so entertaining. Like, I was doing an adult live stream yesterday, and she got to watch, like, what I do. And I think I'm pretty good at what I do. And she's like, wow, that was so hot. Like, you're such a good entertainer. And I'm like, I know, why don't more people see me? I never have a whole lot of followers or viewers or whatever. But anyway, we need to talk about your charts. So who wants a reading? Unless you just want me to keep on going. Jazzy Dreamer. Jazzy Dreamer in Malia. So let's go to Jazzy Dreamer. Excuse me. Jazzy Dreamer. Sorry, forgot what order you like. I mean, I typically go with thank you, Jazzy. I typically start with members and or people who've donated. And members, let me know if you want me to get to you first. I get members all the time, and they've probably got the equivalent of like a full reading by now. I mean, not really, because full readings are a whole different thing with me. And if you want to book a reading, my shit's the fucking best, yo. I mean, not only am I skilled in all this because I've been doing astrology for 20 years, but also because I've had enough shitty life experience to be able to empathize with people. You know, I've been through sexual assault, I've been through suicide with my dad, you know. I've been through all, well, not all of it, but I've been through a lot of it. So, you know, I can relate to people. Um, and that's usually what makes me quite effective. So let's see, we're doing Jazzy Dreamer. And you can book through my website, saturngirl.org. saturngirl.org. Let others go before myself. You are so sweet, Quantum. You are so sweet. Thank you. Let's see, Jazzy Dreamer. Jazzy Dreamer. You're so, and thank you for the donation, Jazzy. Thank you for the tip. I really appreciate it. Please tip me because I'm bleeding money and I'm trying to cut out all the expense. Like, I'm not profitable yet as a business, and it's really fucking painful. It's really fucking painful. I need this shit to work. And even as an atheist, I'm praying to Daddy Jupiter every day. I mean, I call myself an atheist, but I pray every day. I do daily devotion to the planets. Well, mostly Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn, but I do daily devotion, you know, because it's real to me. Even though I know in the end, it's really not real, but that doesn't matter. Within the context of my daily life, Venus is my mommy. And, you know, I didn't have a great relationship with my own mother. And so, like, you know, I get very emotional about Venus. She's my mommy, and she takes care of me. And I feel like a real relationship with her, you see? So Jazzy Dreamer's a Leo rising. Did I get your information correct, my darling? Leo rising with an Aquarius moon. Technically, your moon is with an orb to be conjunct my ascendant. So, you know. Oh, yes, please ask a question. Otherwise, I just start talking. I'm sorry. Yeah, please, if you want a reading, mention a couple questions. And then I'll probably mention some spiritual nonsense, right? Because what, you know, what we call the Dharma or the reason for being this life, you know, the work you're supposed to do is embodied in your rising sign. You're a Virgo rising. So, what did I get wrong? Oh, I had, sorry. I don't know why I did that. Jazzy Dreamer. Why did it go back to the other thing? Sorry about that, sweetheart. Gosh, I'm dragging. I'm dragging today. Delete this. Okay. Single chart. God, this is so cumbersome. I need to get better at this. I need to get better at streaming. Hi, Deepika. How are you? It's good to see you. Hi, Bexy. Thank you for coming. You're my only Twitch Twitch person on here. Thank you for coming. I think I was just talking about you. Anyway, here we go. Virgo rising with Pluto conjunct. Oh my goodness. Look at that. Still a Gemini moon. Well, you had an Aquarius moon, the other thing. A Gemini moon conjunct the midheaven. When we see the moon conjunct the midheaven, usually it's pretty auspicious. Like, you know, FDR had that, I'm pretty sure. But it often signals a little bit of prominence somewhere. I mean, the moon rules Cancer, which is for you the 11th house. So I would imagine that you do something in sales, perhaps. You'd be a customer-facing worker, right? You'd probably get a good reputation. People would probably generally like you. I don't know if you'd agree with that or whatever. Oh, please ask a question. Jazzy, I'm sorry, I just started talking. Please ask a question. You were having your Scorpio return. I mean, your Scorpio, your Venus return, your Venus in Scorpio. Venus is about to go into Sagittarius in just a few days. I guess next week, right? Next week. Is it the 17th? No sales? Well, you're probably pretty good with people. Or you get a good reputation. See, you have Saturn retrograde. Do you have a question, though? Anything on love? See, that's a question. Thank you. For love, we typically look at the 7th house ruler, right? And what jumps out right away about your 7th house is both your North Node and your part of fortune is there. So you see, the life motif as you get older, right, is about relationships and learning how to perfect relationships. And so I imagine that you may have had a bit of codependent tendencies. Now, why do I say that? Because the ruler of your first house is Mercury. And Mercury is not happy in Sagittarius, right? Mercury is what's called in detriment, which often confers like ADHD, a scattered brain, an impulsive brain, like, hard to focus, right? And so when the first house ruler is sort of not dignified down there, it can make the stuff of that house. Sometimes it has to do with health. Sometimes it has to do with confidence or self-image, that sort of thing. Perhaps there was some body dysmorphia or whatever. But that stuff can affect our relationships. As you get older, though, perfecting relationships would be a big deal. But of course, that only comes from self-confidence, right? Through going through crappy shit. I mean, to be quite honest with you. And you have your moon, square your North Node, which indicates that emotions oftentimes get in the way. And not like you're not supposed to have emotions, but the sense of insecurity, of emotional insecurity, you see. At least that's what it looks like. I could be totally wrong, But we'll look at some love transits, of course, because this is Pisces, yeah? And so Saturn is going through your 7th house of relationships, which if you had a partner, and I think you're trying to say you don't, I would say that relationships would either get strained or you have a deepening commitment, but you may feel trapped, you see? And so the lunar eclipse that just happened in September was also in your 7th house. So you see what's happening in your life, at least what it looks like to me, is that you're slowly trying to bring this phase of loneliness to a close, right? Divorced. Where's Jupiter? Your 7th house ruler, rather, is Jupiter in the 2nd house, right? So you need people who have their own stuff, who have their own money, who aren't draining you, because you probably let partners drain you quite a bit. Or maybe you were the breadwinner, like bringing home the bacon, and they just kind of like took advantage of it. I don't know if that's the case, but that's typically what I would see here. But the combination of Saturn going through your 7th house, right? Along with the lunar eclipse at the end of September in your 7th house, right? And then Jupiter ruling your 7th house, being in Gemini, actually relatively conjunct your moon right now, and sort of square Saturn on and off, right, till next year, you're going to see big changes in this whole thing, right? Oh, no, he was the breadwinner? Yeah, okay. I can be wrong, oftentimes. I can be wrong. But you would be interested in people who have their own stuff, or perhaps the breadwinner types. When I see the 8th house Chiron and that sort of thing, though, that's why I think of that. Maybe you experienced death or debt early on as a child, or at least before your 30th birthday. And then you had a bad experience of religion growing up, probably too, you know. Anyway, anyway, um, but you see, all this stuff is signaling, trying to bring a period of loneliness to an end, right? So I would say, especially after February, start trying to get out there and date again, because Jupiter's your seventh house ruler and went retrograde on the 9th, just a few days ago, right? And that represents what? A contraction and a constriction in that house, that area of life. So what it's telling you, it should be giving you a sense of urgency. Like, you know what? Life's too short. I need to like get off this stupid fucking fear case, or I don't know what it is for you, but oftentimes it's because we're afraid, you know. And the 8th house is fear, of course. Right? Mars has been going through your 11th house, which often can cut relationships with friends off, or it can make us feel a bit isolated. And then Mars goes into your 12th house starting in November. So you see, you're going to have this back and forth, this push-pull, you know, between isolation and connection, right? But as we get into next year, like January, February, you'll see all this stuff kind of start to dissipate as well. My mom is sick. I can't do anything. Well, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. But why did you ask about love if you can't do anything? You know? Let me think right now. Where is Saturn? You see, the moon is the mother. The moon is the mother. Jupiter is going retrograde conjunct your moon relatively. Saturn is moving retrograde. You know, still within orb of your north node. So, I mean, it sort of makes sense because the moon is the mother, right? So it does sort of make sense. I'm sorry. You know, I'm very sorry. You're just wondering? No, I know. It's just, you know, I wish you could just get out. I wish you could, because this could be a potent time for you. I mean, at least after February, right? At least after February. Now, also the eclipses, I need to move on to someone else, but the eclipses are bouncing between your 2nd and 8th houses, which indicates that your finances and death are sort of the main focus, right, of this cycle that's closing out. Because you see, the nodes will move into your 1st and 7th house, right? So the focus starting next year is going to move more and more into relationships and your relationship to yourself. You're closing out this phase of death and possessions, right? So you have to understand the eclipse that's about to happen next year. I think it's in April or at the end of March. It will be in Aries, and that will be your 8th house. So sometimes that can represent a big beginning or ending that involves death or debt or investment or insurance or something like that, you see? So I don't know if that means anything to you, but you should be you're entering one of the biggest phases of your life next year, you see, with the nodes going into your 1st and 7th houses. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. X is an Aries. Well, you know, if he's an Aries, his sun would have been in your 8th house, and that's sort of why I was wondering about him draining you of resources. But anyway, who's next? Malia? Malia. I mean, I hope that was useful, Jazzy. I hope that was useful. If I really wanted to get detailed, I would look at your zodiacal releasing, but I did sort of beat your shit to death, you know? So let's go to Malia. Malia, you still here, baby? Are you still here, baby? Torrance. Torrance always reminds me of The Shining. Danny's not here, Mrs. Torrance. Anyone remember The Shining? I love The Shining. Malia, baby, you still here? Malia Schmidt, 1/1893, 2:28 a.m. Danny's not here, Mrs. Torrance. Such a good movie, you know? All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. It's not even a good. Oh, thank you, Malia. Okay. But it's not even a good impression of Jack Nicholson. It was a good movie, though. It was a really good movie. So here's Malia. We have a Scorpio. See, the last two people, I didn't say anything about Jazzy Dreamer's Pluto ascendant thing, right? Pluto rising. Any planet that's conjunct the ascendant was rising over the eastern horizon as you were born, right? So once again, we see a Pluto rising. Now, for your sake and for Jazzy Dreamer's sake, I'll just say really quickly, everyone calls Pluto conjunct the ascendant transformation, right? I have Pluto square my ascendant. What they mean when they say transformation is life-shattering crisis. We learn, we experience life through a series of shattering crises, right? How do you make a fucking diamond? It's heat and pressure, isn't it? That's what makes us into precious gems. And Pluto rules precious gems from under the earth, you see. And we could talk about the symbolism of Pluto in a different video sometime. But it's just really interesting to note, isn't it? So and Pluto was also power and wealth. So when we see Pluto conjunct the ascendant, we see a darker type presentation sometimes. People with dark humor or, ma'am, what's in your heart? Shaped necklace. Well, you see, I'm so distracted. I used to have a dominant, I was a submissive. I'm typically a dominant myself, but I was the submissive in a BDSM relationship for a while. And my boyfriend slash dom had given me a locket, a collar. And then when we broke up, of course, they took it back. And I got my own fucking collar that says Saturn Girl. It says Saturn Girl right here. This is actually meant for dogs or cats. It's an animal thing. But it says Saturn Girl, which means Saturn is my grandmommy and she's my dominant. And I call Saturn by she. Linder Bees. Yeah, Pluto conjunct the ascendant. My daughter has it too. No, and I'm not saying, Malia, that you have wealth. I'm saying there's a fascination with power. And you may have a creepy presence. And I don't mean that like you're a creepy person. I mean, when you walk into a room, you may upset people. You may upset the energy or the atmosphere. Because there's a powerful presence that you may or may not be aware of. Like, you may have the experience of other women just talking shit about you. Like, who does she think she is? Fuck her. Like, ugh. She thinks she's so special or so great. Just because it's the way you carry yourself. Or this is more common. Like, this is what what I typically see with clients, right? But it also can give big upheavals in terms of the health, right? It can give big upheavals in terms of health conditions and all that sort of thing, So we go through these dramatic periods sometimes of being sick or feeling sick, you see. But it's a powerful thing. Oftentimes, Pluto ascendant people are involved with kink. Oftentimes we feel powerless as children. We have our power stripped away from us. And I imagine, one or both parents were religious because of Mars in the 9th house. And that, it gave you a bad experience of religion. So I'm only saying all this for the benefit of people who have Pluto aspecting their ascendant. It's like getting smashed to pieces, right? And then having to put yourself back together. But you're not the same person. You're totally changed. You're still you, the spirit you at your core. But you're not recognizable to yourself. You see, and that's initiation. It's not adding anything to you, it's taking stuff away. And Pluto's the lord of death in many ways, right? The ruler of the underworld. Therefore, initiation is death. A lot of times it's dying to what you thought you were before. St. Paul said, I die daily. He didn't mean physically or literally. He meant dying to what he thought he was, right? More and more is revealed. I always say to my clients, be yourself. But there's always more of yourself to be, you see. So anyway, you're having your Mars return, which could be, did you have a question, Malia? I'm sorry. Did you have a question? I just want to address a specific question if you have one. Otherwise, I'll just say, the purpose of Scorpio rising is struggling with the self. It's the spiritual warrior, But Scorpio is like Mars turned inward, right? Towards the battle with desire, right? And the self in that way. The self is being determined by its desires. And it's not like we suppress our desires. We just have to see them and how they hurt us. Can you have a look at my chart, please? I'll rewatch the video tomorrow. I've got to sleep. Yes, I will have a look at your chart, IL. Thank you. Yes, I will. Yeah, I have on my mirror death in service to life. Well, yeah. And that's a very prescient sort of phrase. Death in service to life. Because we only experience life by giving up what we are attached to. Now think of this. How much time do we spend stuck in our heads, racing off into imagination about things that haven't even happened? Worries, concerns, doubts, fears, like me right now about money. And then how much are we dwelling on memories that we don't even remember correctly? We waste our thought energy and we waste time living in our heads, right? Death to service of life to me means being present and letting go of these identifications because they come from a sense of fear, of a fundamental misunderstanding that we are at stake from these things. You see? Anyway, I'm preaching still. But career stuff, we want to look at your 10th house ruler, don't we? We want to look at your 10th house ruler, which is the sun. And the sun is in Capricorn in the 3rd house. Typically that means, and conjunct Mercury, typically that means writing and speaking are strong points of yours, or being involved in education, or local orgs in some way, local organizations, stuff like that. Sometimes media, yeah? Some sort of media job or whatever. But right now, the nodes are moving into your 5th and 11th house, right? Which is sort of freeing you from this previous condition of not having any creativity or feeling like you weren't getting to express your creativity, perhaps. Pluto and Saturn is ruining my chance to ever have a life partner. I'm suffering so badly. Oh. Well, I'm sorry. If you want to put your stuff in the chat, we'll get to you in just a bit. Not a good speaker and writing is difficult for you. Well, that might be part of what you're overcoming. You have a night chart, right? So Saturn is your most difficult planet. I'd imagine you had a very a painful home life growing up. Maybe your father was, or one of your parents at least, may have been abusive or absent or just domineering, So with Chiron in the 10th house too, life direction is always a problem for you. You feel like you don't have any direction, you see? But right now, Mars is about to move into Leo, which is your 10th house in November. So you're going to be having this weird thing going on where Mars is going to be sort of pressing you to find a certain direction right? A new career path, perhaps, but you're going to have conflict around it. Maybe you have a fight with your boss. Maybe you get fired. Maybe you get a bad reputation in some way. But there's going to be something with Mars in your 10th house that you have to pick up the pieces for after all this happens. So I hate to say it, but, Mars goes retrograde in December. So between December and March, it's going to be quite difficult. Excuse me. But creativity or children, perhaps. I don't know. I mean, goodness. Do you have any children? Do you have any children? I could look up. So in terms of zodiacal releasing, your peak periods are here. So you always have a mixed bag of stuff happening in these peak periods. In these peak periods. Let me check. I just want to see zodiacal releasing very quick. Very, very quick. Very quick. You're 10 years younger than me. So you're 31. 31. Yeah, let's see about career. Let's see about career. Oh, wow. So, next year, November of next year, you're entering a level. Here, I guess let me pull this up really quick. Web browser. No, wasn't that. Presentation. So, I'm not going to explain zodiacal releasing. We can do another show on that someday. I have such a hard time with Leos. They trigger me. Well, typically when a certain type of person triggers us, it's because of something in ourselves that is put off by it. So it's also like, relevant or worthwhile asking you or asking yourself and investigating in yourself why they trigger you. What is it about them? Because you see, it's an unconscious triggering. And your job is to make that conscious. Like, what is it about them triggering you? Anyway, you'll notice here that in November of next year, there's going to be a big peak period in Cancer. Now, that's also the sign that contains your Mars, right? So it's always a mixed bag, right? Because Jupiter is square, right? But Mars is always going to make these periods of increased activity for you a bit rife with conflict also. So your best of times is also sort of difficult, right? Triggers are showing where we should also heal. I mean, heal is one of those words that's just thrown around by New Age idiots a lot without any understanding of what that means. What does healing mean for you? It means recognizing something in ourselves that is holding us back. Healing is letting go. That's healing. Healing is an emergence into a new understanding of ourselves. I had, and still have to a certain extent, codependency issues, which led me into lots of, 3 or 4 abusive relationships. And those were my long-term relationships, you see. And I had to realize and see my own fear of being alone, my fear of abandonment, my fear of life. I thought I was a confident person before. I was weak as fuck. And I had to see that for myself. And that's how I was able to come out as trans right after that last abusive relationship, you see? So it's very important to recognize, and that's why I say we're making the unconscious conscious, So anyway, Malia, and yeah, Astro Bay, I will look at I've never had a long term in my whole life, exactly because of Pluto and Saturn in my first house. Well, I don't know what that has to do with of relationships. I don't see. We can look at your chart and let me give you. I'm sorry, like I'm not trying to sound like a bitch. I'm autistic. I'm very direct. I'm very, very sort of passionate about this stuff. When an autistic person is an extrovert and sort of attractive, everyone just thinks we're evil, you know? But I swear I'm not evil, right? Well, some people might disagree. But anyway, in terms of the job prospect, right? Your zodiacal releasing says that next year is going to be a big deal for you, right? Going to be a big deal for you. Now, money's always difficult. Have you lost a significant amount of money or had it stolen from you? You know, because it's aspecting the seventh house. Well, we'll look at your stuff. But I see my chart in sidereal astrology. No, and not Western. That's not a thing. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just saying that's not a thing. Sidereal astrology is not separate from Western astrology. That's not a thing. You could say Vedic astrology is, but that's not even a thing either. Vedic astrology uses the sidereal zodiac, you see? And I fundamentally disagree with the sidereal zodiac. I think please don't take this as being rude or mean. I think it's stupid to use it in horoscopic astrology. You can watch my whole video on why I think it's stupid. I think it's like 45 minutes long, and I go into great detail. But suffice it to say, it completely dismisses the symbolism that astrology is erected upon. The difference between the sidereal zodiac, and the tropical, that's the distinction between sidereal and tropical. Now, what's the difference? The difference is that sidereal attempts to account for what's called the precession of the equinoxes, or axial precession. Now, what is axial precession? You see, the Earth rotates, right, or spins on its axis as it orbits the sun, and therefore makes like this kind of motion, right? And it makes this whole cycle of drawing a circle, right, in the sky over the course of 25 to 26,000 years, right? This is known as the Greater Cycle. And it was discovered by Hipparchus around 125 BCE, you see? The great Greek astronomer. See, I'm very passionate about this. I hate sidereal so much. And I see people say, oh, it's more accurate. It's not more accurate. It's not. Because why? The constellations don't define the zodiac. It's the sun. The solstices and equinoxes. And what happens in the sidereal zodiac is the signs move and change relative to the solstices and equinoxes. And this is wrong. It's fundamentally incorrect because the signs mostly get their meanings from two places. Number one, the planets that rule them, and number two, their place in the solar cycle. That is relative to the solstices and equinoxes in that annual journey of the sun, which is the increase and decrease of light, as I spoke about earlier, that alternation between soul or spirit and matter, you see. One of the whole points of Scorpio and its meaning is the fact that it happens after the fucking Libra equinox. What happens in Libra? We have equal night and equal day. Libra gets a lot of its meaning from the fact that it's at the equinox, the equivocation, the balance, you see? And Scorpio is that first point when the days become longer than the nights. So what is that? That's the descent into hell, into the prison of matter, where the soul is bound in the prison, you see? It's like Christ being judged. And then the winter solstice is the death, you see? And Capricorn gets a lot of its meaning from the fact that it's at the winter solstice and ruled by Saturn. Let me see really quick. What'd you say? I'm really curious about what you have to say about my chart in tropical then. Cool, we'll get to that. But anyway, Malia, it looks like you do have some interesting career stuff happening, but it's not going to be all fun. There's going to be a conflict of some sort. I don't know if you have a job right now. Shit. I just spilled my coffee. Ugh. I have a hole in my lip. But anyway, there's going to be a conflict. Either you quit a job, you get fired from a job, or you have a conflict with a boss or coworker. Or when this happened to me, I started doing adult content again, and I got a bad reputation a little bit, So anyway, let's get to the next chart. But as I was saying, it's going to be a focus. Now, I'd expect stuff to get better for you towards fall of next year. Towards fall of next year. Jupiter goes into Cancer. Saturn goes into Aries. It's going to be interesting. So anyway, I'm so passionate I am. Sidereal was an attempt to add scientific legitimacy to astrology that failed. Yes, yeah. Thank you, Caleb. Yeah, you're totally... And Caleb is one of my best friends. I love me some Caleb. Malia says a massage therapist. Malia says a massage therapist. Well, Mars rules your 6th house of, medical stuff and healing and service. And is in your 9th, of study and religion and spirituality. And a lot of those things are sort of, you see massage therapists oftentimes involved in like Reiki and stuff like that. Or they'll do techniques that they consider sort of spiritual or esoteric. So I don't know if you have that same sort of thing, but Chiron in your 10th house makes you always concerned about your life direction. Venus in the 5th house is very creative. Learning to use your creativity in what you do. So anyway, we got to move on to the next person. Bexy says, I'm proud of you. Thank you. So let's see who is next. Let's see who is next. After Jazzy. We did Malia. We did Jazzy. Who else? Deepika. I'm applying for many jobs. That's Deepika. Deepika. Okay. Deepika, you didn't give me your birth city. I can't do that without your city. I need date, time, city. Date, time, city. In that order, please. Date, time, city. Let me see if I have it. Otherwise, I'll go on to the next person while I'm waiting for your city. Do I have a chart for you in here? I don't think so. No. So let me know your city. Oh, Bangalore. Okay, cool. Bangalore. See, I love having friends from India on here. Because we can sort of see like a lot of the intersection between these seemingly different types of astrology, It's very useful. So we have a Taurus rising, and Deepika asked about career stuff. So once again, we think about the 10th house, don't we? We also think about the 2nd house, yeah? You have Jupiter going through your 2nd house right now. Now, Jupiter just went retrograde, so that sort of, puts a damper on your social life and your social circle. It might feel like you're not getting a lot of help. And it may feel like you owe money, like maybe you're in debt or something like that, right? But then Saturn, the hell is this? But Saturn also represents um, your 10th house, right? And is currently going through your 11th. So that further compounds this sensation of like being left to your own devices, being stuck, feeling alone perhaps, like no one is helping you. And you see, with the lunar eclipse in all that, you're learning that you need help, you need support. Maybe you rejected a bunch of people. Maybe they rejected you. It may have felt like you cut people off. But the whole point of this is about rebuilding connection, you see. Yeah, you said you have an educational loan, you have debt, right? So, because Jupiter rules that 8th house and is in Gemini, which he doesn't like, and he's retrograde. So he's constricting everything. So you see, between now and February, you're being asked to tighten your belt, to focus on paying off debt, and to consolidate your finances for that purpose. You know, but the nodes are moving into your 5th and 11th house, which is a more optimistic time. You see, it's a prelude to Saturn going into Aries, which is what? Your Saturn return, right? And Saturn in the 12th house, which will, you know, that will be a whole nother thing. You'll feel exiled perhaps, or you're going to have to be alone for a bit, or at least withdraw from the busyness of public life. You see? Now, you probably had a lot of career difficulties in 2022 and 2021, you know, 2021, 2022. Gosh. I mean, really, this is sort of showing you that you're not an island, you know, that you need people to help you. And so you may have to apologize or forgive certain people that you'd rather not, you know. Ma'am, what's the meaning of your tattoo? Well, I have a couple of them. Deepika, yes, I have debt. Bangalore, Caleb says. Oh, we have someone from Hungary, Budapest. I'm definitely not a fan of Viktor Orban, that's for sure. He would love to get rid of me. So anyway, that's the eclipse phase that you're in. What else is going to happen? Well, Venus goes into your 10th house eventually in December. That'll be pretty lucky for you. Jupiter's your best planet, though, being that you have a day chart, right? And Jupiter going through your 2nd house, you know, sort of constraining things, but you're going to see your financial situation improve after February. That's very likely. But I think you'll see even more of an improvement with your job situation next year, unfortunately, you know? Let's see what's going on here. Jupiter's your best planet. But unfortunately, this is the axis of activity for zodiacal releasing. Gosh, Moon opposite Mars. You got to be careful with injuries. You got to be careful getting cuts and burns and scrapes and stuff like that. Venus, Mars. Wonder if you have any big career stuff happening. And then we have to move on to Pika. It's just amazing how useful zodiacal releasing is for this kind of stuff, for these questions. Okay, Bangalore. There we go. Oh my gosh. Well, you're in a significant peak period right now for career stuff that ends in 2026. I'll throw this back up there. So, yeah, oh my gosh. Now this started in August of 2022. Gosh, you have all this confluence of peak periods. Now they're not necessarily good or bad because um you don't have a malefic or benefic aspecting by sign. You're part of fortune, right? I'm sorry for all this jargon. I know it doesn't make any sense, but it's what it is. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. So you see, now, gosh, November. This is happening pretty quickly. Once again, November. I would expect some very interesting career stuff. November here, starting. And notice that's when Mars goes into Leo, right? And that's your 4th house, which is the same house as your part of fortune. So it may be something having to do with your homeland, with real estate, with your parents, right? With land, or your private life, working from home, perhaps. But also when that happens, we get into fights with our parents. We have schisms or separations from our parents or cut off our parents, conflicts with our parents. So just watch out for that. Left arm is the astrological symbol for Saturn. I'll let her explain the right arm if she wants. Yeah, the right arm over here. This is Venus with a knife, which means a killer bitch. You know what I mean? It's my own little design, Venus with a knife. This is actually Jupiter with a pistol. And I'm going to get Saturn with an AR-15 here. And then Saturn girl right here, just in cursive. I know, I'm like a nut. I'm a nut bar. But I would support a ban on all weapons tomorrow, oddly enough. I would. But, you know, I grew up with the things. My dad was military. He was a combat veteran. So, Astro Bay. Fuck Jupiter, my... Oh, no, it's okay, my love. Caleb is wonderful. I love Caleb. Okay, Astro Bay. Astro Bay. We'll do you. We'll do Astro Bay. Budapest. Budapest, as the Brits say. I love how British people like make every word sound fucked up. I remember I heard a British anchor one time on like Sky News say Obama, Barack Obama for Barack Obama, Barack Obama. Like, what do you mean Barack Obama? The least you could do is say his name the way he says it. You know, Barack Obama. I was just watching Piers Morgan interview Mehdi Hassan, who's like one of my heroes, and it was so funny. Piers Morgan is such a dork. He's such a dork. Zero Dark 30. Look at you. Zero Dark 30. I mean, it's 29, but same thing. Zero Dark 30. Zero Dark 30. 1983, same year I was born. Budapest. Hungary. Yeah. Here we go. So here we go. So, you know, you told me earlier that you typically look at your chart in sidereal. I'm not trying to tell you anything is wrong. I'm just saying my understanding, my logical understanding of the history and the symbolism behind it all. And I also understand sidereal pretty intimately, right? And the thing we have to remember is that the constellations don't define the zodiac. They are precursors for the zodiacal signs. The zodiac, both tropical and sidereal, are mathematically ideal circles of 360 degrees divided up into 12 equal sections of 30 degrees that we call signs. The signs are not constellations. They're not. Even the sidereal zodiac is not constellations, right? The constellations were precursors. Otherwise, they would be going by the width of the signs, like used to happen in ancient Mesopotamia, right? But the tropical zodiac fixes the cardinal signs to the cardinal points. That is, the solstices and equinoxes. And this is the correct way, because you can't have the fucking signs moving relative to them. That means in 800 years, Gemini would be at the winter solstice or whatever. If you feel me? So, or maybe it's 8,000. I don't know. But the whole point is that fixing the signs, the cardinal signs to the solstices and equinoxes is what imbues the zodiac with meaning, right? So anyway, I'm just saying that because we're looking at your chart in the tropical zodiac. After Astro, you've got a request from someone who wants to catch up later. Oh, yes. Yeah. So anyway, you're a Libra rising in tropical. You're a Capricorn sun, right, in tropical. Right? So Libra is sort of like the Dharma, right? Which has to do with the middle way, right? Like Nagarjuna, and Caleb will appreciate this, like the Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna said, the middle way is ultimately between existence and non-existence. But all these dualities we see in astrology, right? Like spirit and matter, or consciousness and body, or, life and death, all these seeming dualities, right? Libra is about the eventual resolution or the awareness of the liminal space between them. And that's the place of neither existence nor non-existence. And Caleb is the one who got me into all this shit, Which is really, to me, this is sort of representative of the means and method by which we free ourselves from the fate of our charts. The body will always be governed by fate, right? But the realization is about where the sense of I comes from in the first place. You see? And that's sort of the goal of studying all this stuff. But in terms of your chart, you're talking about relationship stuff, right? Your 7th house is Aries in this system. So Mars would represent your 7th house ruler and the kind of, you're welcome. And the kind of partners that you would go for. You would probably tend to go for very confident people, or people who felt like arm candy. You're probably attracted to, you're probably more into physical attraction, perhaps, or you're into attractive type men, assuming you're even into men. It's just most of my subscribers tend to be straight women, But also you might be going for narcissistic type dudes, right? People whose own image is way more important. They're more concerned with their own reputation and looking good in front of others, perhaps, than taking care of you. Now, why do I say that also? Because Mars is in Cancer. And Mars is what's called in fall in Cancer. And why is that? Because Mars is exalted in Capricorn, right? So, excuse me. Mars is exalted in Capricorn. And you have Mars opposite Uranus like me. No one can tell you what to do. You probably don't like rules and authority, yeah? You probably don't. I doubt you do. What? Nobody stays in my life. No, it's not hopeless for you. No, it's not hopeless for you. And we can look at your love situation really quick in zodiacal releasing. But we want to pay attention, number one, to the fact you have a night chart. You were born when it was dark out. 0 dark 30, Look, you have the moon square Venus. You see, I have this. What does this mean? That means our need for emotional security is at odds with our need for relationships to connect to people, you see. What does that give us? It gives us shyness. It gives us a lack of self-confidence. Sometimes a poor self-image, right? We don't feel beautiful. Or we may feel like, ashamed of ourselves sometimes, or ashamed of our appearance. Even though we might be very attractive. And see, your Venus is exalted in Pisces, so you probably are. Oh, excuse me. Excuse me. See, your sun square your ascendant. That also might be a bit of body dysmorphia. You see. Mars. See, look at this. You have Mars opposite Uranus and then square Jupiter. You see, so it's like no one can tell you what to do. You're a free spirit. You hate rules and you hate authority. But on the other hand, you always are right. You know you're right, you know. I have Mars opposite Jupiter, and I'm always right. Mars square Jupiter is sort of similar, you know. It's sort of similar, and it's trine your Venus, right? And Mars is retrograde. So typically the good stuff of Mars doesn't happen until later in life, you know. So relationships get better as you get older, typically. It's not like any of this is a death sentence. In astrology, we have this concept of remediation, which is, like you said, healing, right? Now, back in ancient times, that entailed going to pray in the temples of gods and goddesses, right? Oh, please, like I do to Venus and Jupiter, like, please heal my relationships, you know? And I have a wonderful girlfriend now after lots of abusive relationships. And, right, Jupiter with my money situation. You're already old? 1993. Sweetheart, you're not old. I'm 10 years older than you. Is this your... You said 1993, right? 1993? Oh, Layla, I have to get to you. And I have to get to the other person that Caleb mentioned. IL. I have to get to IL. And I have to... But wait. I just want to double check because you just called yourself old. You just called yourself old. And I want to know where this old business came from. Astro Bay. 1983? Why do I have 1993? So everything I just said was bullshit. Maybe I was looking at Malia. So I gotta start over again. I hate that. And see, I'm dyslexic too. Let's see. There's Topeka. Where's your stuff? 1983. So, yeah. Well, I'm sorry. Let me do that again. And this is relationship stuff. Well, we're going to see what your chart really looks like now. And maybe this will make a lot more sense. See, there we go. There we go. Libra rising still. But what you have to see about all this, number one, Mars rules your 7th house still and is in the 6th house, which is divorces, of course. You know, it's divorces. Now, you may like a reliable partner. You would need a reliable partner, of course, and maybe even, you may even like to be submissive, or maybe you want a submissive partner. But when I see a Pisces moon in the 6th house, I think you're probably more of a submissive type, you know? But yes, divorces have been in the cards. Now, none of this is a death sentence, as I said. You probably had a big breakup over the past year or two since 2023, right? And in 2023 is when the nodes, moved into Aries and Libra, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. So there was a series of eclipses that were bouncing back and forth between your 1st and 7th house. This is like having your personality just beaten down and deconstructed. So you probably got faced with a lot of these relationship issues, right? Especially since April of this past year, because we had a total eclipse in April, which would have been in your 7th house, which can signal a big breakup or meeting someone new, oftentimes. You see? And then you just had the eclipse in October in your 1st house. And you have Pluto rising also. So you see, this is all about having your personality smashed And this probably has to do with the tendency towards codependency. And I'm not trying to like project my own issues onto you, but I just see this so frequently, especially with the Pisces moon in the 6th house, right? Now the moon rules your 10th house, which could signal that you're involved in like the medical profession or working with animals or the service industry. Yeah, we see a lot of people in the service industry with this sort of thing. Now, and your north node is in the 10th house, meaning that as you get older, right, around our age now, and we're not old, I'm 40 fucking one, you're 40 fucking one. Like, we're not old, we're still young, forever young, right? I want to be forever young. Do you really want to live forever? Forever. Anyway, Geminis are forever young, you see. But as you get older, life is more about achievement, especially at this point in your life. Now, it's not like, see, relationships are sort of the focus right now. Discarded. I was discarded, brutally abandoned. My heart broken to pieces. He left me pregnant. I mean, you see right there. So you're a sub. I call myself a princess, but I'm a dom. Like, you know, I'm a dominant princess. That's what I call myself. You know, people do what I say in relationships. I mean, consensually, in a healthy way, you know. And I'm mostly with submissives, but, you know. So, but you see the submissive tendency from the 6th house, right? That also signals codependence sometimes. And codependence is when we're too scared to leave a relationship, right? Or, she said, you're adorable. She said, I'm happy for you that you found the right partner. I mean, she's wonderful, but I'm polyamorous, so there's tons of right partners out there, you know. I mean, I don't have time to go dating too much. You are also beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. I know yesterday on my adult stream, all these men were like, oh my God, you're so gorgeous. Oh my God, you're so sexy. Oh my God, dirty thing, dirty thing, dirty thing, you know, but it made me feel so good. And my girlfriend was off camera watching and she's like, oh my God, they love you. I'm like, they sure do. You can see I'm humble too. I'm very humble, you know. So thank you. We're not just going to touch on the fact that for you, the right person, you absolutely melt into your own subspace, Saturn girl. I mean, yeah, you know. Yes, I do melt into my own subspace. I mean, I'm kind of a switch. I just lean dominant, you know. Really, I'm primal. It's all contextual. You know, dogs sniff each other's butts to find out who's dominant. I just go around sniffing people's butts to see who's dominant. Anyway. It's gross, but, you know. So anyway, this makes perfect sense, the tumultuous stuff in relationships. And I'm so sorry, but it does make sense about the child thing, you know. Saturn's your 5th house ruler of children and going through your 6th house. You see? That's being stuck and left and trapped in this circumstance. But I don't want you to worry too much, because what happens, though, starting next spring, summer, is Saturn goes into your 7th house. And this is going to force you to take a look at your relationships. And you may make a deeper commitment to someone. You may meet someone. When this happened to me, my ex-wife and I moved in together. You see, it was a deepening of commitments. So I can't hope for anyone staying. I didn't say that, baby. No, I didn't say that at all. I did not say that. I'm saying you just had a big disruption in relationships. And then this eclipse in October is all about your identity. And you won't be able to have fulfilling relationships until you find a certain degree of confidence and value in yourself. Codependence comes from looking for our value through another person. And you'll probably repeat that pattern if you can't find value in yourself. And your North Node is telling you that your self-worth comes from accomplishment, from doing things, not from somebody else. But when you do that, you see, you're going to find the right person. When you can do that, when you can find your own sense of self-worth and value from what you do and not who you're with, right? It means doing things. Confidence comes from accomplishment, or at least trying, right? Otherwise, we just sit in a prison of our own fears, don't we? So that's what I'm saying about relationships for you. Thank you very much. It's strange how tropical astrology... Well, it works well when you have a skilled practitioner who's also very humble. You know, I've been doing this for a long time, but a lot of this stuff too is just, it's experience to a certain extent, having gone through loads of relationships, you know. I was a serial monogamist for a bit, you see, although I was with, you know, my daughter's mom for 12 years. So I have been through very long-term things. So you see, Mars, your 7th house ruler, is about to be going through, right? He's been going through your 10th house, like fucking up your work life, probably, or stirring up conflicts with authority figures, or maybe even giving you a bad reputation. But then he goes into your 11th house. Now he will go retrograde back into your 10th. So that's not totally over. Excuse me. That's not totally over. But in order to contend with this side of your life, you have to find your own value within. Your 1st house ruler's Venus in the 5th house. You may find that being a parent or having a child contributes greatly to this. I mean, I'm sure you probably already have children, but something about having this child is going to awaken a certain amount of that experience in you. Or at least that's what I'm thinking. And you're probably a very sexual and probably very creative person. And it's wonderful to be submissive, but you have to be a little wise about it. You know, who is worth giving your submission to? And people have to earn your trust, right? Codependency is also ignoring red flags, right? You have a son. Good. Saturn trine Mars. See, you need to use your sense of discipline and focus on accomplishment, perhaps career path, and love will follow after that, you know. And what's really important to you is learning to enjoy yourself and play with life. If you can't find fun and joy in life, then everything is meaningless and morose, you know? I just learned to set my boundaries right. Well, you know what boundaries are? They are what you are willing to tolerate. That's what boundaries are. And you get to decide what you're willing to tolerate. The rub, though, is you have to hold yourself to them because other people don't give a shit about your boundaries. They will walk all over them if you don't hold to them. And that's what I'm talking about here. You know, you have to hold yourself to your boundaries. Otherwise, people will treat you like shit over and over again, and you will let it happen. Right? So anyway, let's move on to the next person. Now, Caleb, thank you. Oh, thank you for calling me amazing. I just don't mean to sound like a bitch. I'm so sorry. I don't mean to sound like a bitch. Now, we'll go to IL really quick, and then we'll go to Layla. And I'll say some stuff to IL, who will watch this later. So IL is Aquarius rising like me. So the big thing for us, for Aquarius risings right now, is our fucking money. I've been telling Caleb and my girlfriend, Bexy, about how scared I am about money, right? And why is that? Well, Saturn has been going through our 2nd house of money, right? Depressing our finances. And Saturn went retrograde when? November, October, September, August. Was it August or July? I think it was July. July. It was right before Kamala became the nominee. So Saturn went retrograde back in July, further depressing all this stuff. And then what happened, right? Our 2nd house ruler of money is Jupiter, right? And Jupiter's been in Gemini over here, actually conjunct your Saturn. And meanwhile, Saturn is also square your Jupiter. And guess what else happened? Jupiter went retrograde at the beginning of this month, or on the 9th, you see? So that's more, and Jupiter retrograde contracts and constricts things, right? Makes them smaller. Jupiter usually makes things bigger, right? And then Jupiter retrograde makes things smaller. Like we saw with the hurricane, there was terrible loss of life and loss of money, of course, and loss of property. But there were a lot less fatalities than expected, right? So there was some Jupiter retrograde mitigation going on. But the other thing that does to us is constrict the stuff from those houses. So for us, it's the 2nd and 11th house, right? I feel like I don't have enough followers and supporters. And then I feel like my money's being crunched, right? And we just had the lunar eclipse in September in our 2nd house too. And typically this means like, yo, you've been irresponsible with your resources, you've been wasteful, you've been cavalier, and you need to cut the shit out and get it together, yo. You need to start taking care of your finances. You need to have a budget. You need to cut out non-essentials, right? I made a spreadsheet of all my expenses, and I'm like saying, like, cancel, or remove. You know, I'm picking things that I can cut out because we have to tighten our belts. As Jupiter retrograde indicates, it's the belt getting tighter, getting tighter. I wish you the best of luck and success. Thank you, baby. You're so sweet. Thank you, thank you. You are so sweet. So anyway, finishing up the stuff for IL, you know. Money is the big deal, and so that's what I'm focusing on. Money and career. And Venus has been going through our 10th house. So hopefully you experienced some modicum of visibility. Like for me, when Venus went over my midheaven, I started doing adult content again. And I got a bunch of followers, you see. So, now, your midheaven is in the next house, the 11th house, Sagittarius. So when Venus goes over that, I believe at the end of the month, right? Late October. You're also probably, right, you have a night chart and Venus is your best planet. And you have a very happy Venus in Taurus conjunct your sun, which means she's combust. And that just means her light was eclipsed in a way by the brightness of the sun. So it sort of decreases the good stuff of Venus, but she's still very happy. And when she's conjunct our sun, it indicates a lot attractive, attractive features, very attractive features, you see. Or oftentimes. I always say about Sun conjunct Venus, these people could be complete sociopaths, but they're so charming you wouldn't even guess, Although, like, every sociopath in movie, and that's not correct nomenclature anymore, but, So anyway, and Jupiter and Mars in the first house, that's pretty wild. That's pretty wild. So anyway, the big thing about this all is your money situation, right? It's your money situation. And like I said, Venus is going to hit your midheaven at the end of the month, and that should be a modicum of recognition, you see. A modicum of recognition. Now, stuff doesn't get better for us in our finances until after February, when Jupiter goes direct. But even then, it'll feel like a slog. It'll feel like a slow kind of thing until Jupiter finally until Saturn finally leaves our second house and goes into our third, which will be a whole nother set of issues. We got to make sure to take care of our siblings. My little brother's one of my best friends in the world, So that's the third house stuff. And then what else happens, right? Jupiter goes into Cancer, his sign of exaltation. Now, Saturn is in fall in Aries, so that won't be fun in general. And we're going to have a lot of world conflicts, But Jupiter in Cancer is very beneficial. And that will really help our finances, or at least it'll give us a leg up, you see? So we can start to see stuff get better after February, at least more positive movement and motion and direction. However, the actual material results won't really show up until Jupiter goes into Cancer in the summer. You see? So anyway, so that's IL's chart. We got to move on to the next person. Who is next? Who is next? After IL, it was Layla. Layla, are you still here, baby? Please still be here. I'm sorry I talk so much. Layla, I'm down on my knees, Layla. Right? You know that song, Layla? By, what the fuck was his name? God. The British guy, the guitarist. The fuck was his name? Layla, you got me on my knees. Diddle-doo-doo. How's it go? Diddle-doo-doo-doo. No, that's Rolling Stones. Do 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 do. Layla, do 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 do. Layla. Okay, sorry. I keep thinking it. Who the fuck was his name? I see my brain is going. I'm getting old, I guess. The fuck was his name? One of the most famous guitarists, God damn it. What was his name? Caleb's, of course, gonna know it and tell me down below. Eric Clapton, yeah. Eric Clapton. Layla, then Quantum. Yeah, everyone sings Eric Clapton to you. I know. Layla. Well, and Layla is also Arabic for night. I had an Iranian, Persian, she preferred to be called Persian, a Persian classmate in elementary school. And Layla is Arabic for night. Eric Clapton. I can't believe I forgot Eric Clapton. Where the fuck is... Oops. Layla. Rapid City, South Dakota. My girlfriend's from one of the places. One of those places. Oh, we have another 1983 baby. You're my age. You're my age, but we're forever young. Forever young. I want to be forever young. Do you really want to live forever? Forever. Forever young. I want to be forever young. So here's Layla. We have a Cancer rising, hooray. And we have a North Node in the first house, right? When I see a North Node in the first house, I usually want to look at the condition of the 7th house ruler, because I often think, oh gosh, I wonder if they have codependency issues. I know I bring that up all the time. I know I do. But it's because the 7th house can be very simpy. My girlfriend is a Dakotan. Yes, a Dakotan. A Dakotan. Sounds so funny. A Dakotan. But you see, I would typically look at the 7th house ruler, which is Saturn right here in the 5th house, right? And retrograde. So all the good stuff of relationships typically doesn't happen until later in life, you see? Well, and this would be the time in life when it would start. I hate to say that 40s are later in life, but kind of midlife, right? I don't want to midlife. Fuck that shit, People have codependency issues with you. Wow. Well, that doesn't surprise me too much in a way, because North Node, first house, right? But you see, at this phase in your life, everything is about your own sort of development, your own sense of personality, your own sense of accomplishment. right? Your own sense of discovering yourself, perhaps. So, and this is very fruitful because it represents focusing on your own sense of identity and unraveling that for yourself. Just like I said earlier, be yourself, but there's always more of yourself to be. Now, the first house ruler is the moon in the 8th house. And when I see that, I typically think of self-harm. And I'm not trying to be presumptive or presumptuous, rather. But we do often see self-harm. I mean, people like Ernest Hemingway had this. We also might see people who are engaged in criminal activities, excessive fear, right? Losses, death, things like that. Maybe you had to deal with death early on. Now, your mom may have also been quite difficult, right? Because the moon is often the mother. And then in the 8th house of fear, trauma, right? Other people's stuff. Maybe your mother stole from you even. Or you felt trapped by your mother. I don't know. Right? But your father was probably no walk in the park either. And the reason I say that is because Venus rules your 4th house of the father and then is unhappy in Aries, right? So she's unhappy in Aries, but she's at the top of your chart. So dad may have been successful or important in some way, or at least may have had or maybe even had a bad reputation, right? Or maybe because Venus isn't happy, maybe the opposite, not successful, gotten fired or had conflicts with jobs or whatever. Very, you may go last if you wish, Caleb. I mean, we're going to go for a while more, so don't worry. I'm dealing with the death and a shit mom, and we don't talk anymore. Both of my parents were asshole fire signs. I mean, that's sort of indicated here, right? Both of these rulers are here in your 10th, or in Aries, And the 10th house is often seen as the mother because it's opposite the 4th, which is the father. So you could think of the 10th house as the partner of the father, yes? Which is very interesting too. But then the moon in the 8th house indicates all that trauma shit. And so when the moon is in the 8th house, healing is about forgiveness, right? And forgiveness isn't for those assholes. You don't have to talk to them. It's probably better you don't. But learning to let them go bit by bit and learning to let the trauma go bit by bit is what heals you. And how do we do that? We have to allow ourselves to feel things. And what do you have? You have an Aquarius moon, which is very averse to feeling things. They hate to feel things. It's uncomfortable. You always want to intellectualize your emotions, probably. Well, this is because and whatever. No, you have to let yourself cry. You have to let yourself fall to pieces. You have to let yourself experience grief. And that's how we let go. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Wall Street back in the 80s, but Michael Douglas says, greed is good. I disagree. I say grief. Grief is good. With an F, grief. Because grief is the process by which we feel things and we're able to let them go, right? Because these emotions and these traumas, these fears and these memories, they hold us back from a freer expression of ourselves, you see? And that's why I tell people all the time that relationships don't get satisfying until we figure that shit out. And the type of partner that you need is a partner like me. You need fun-loving, sexual, childlike partners or partners who are good with children. And with Saturn in your 5th house, there's probably been a problem around childbirth, right? Either you can't have children or you just never even wanted them, or your pregnancy was quite difficult. Although I also see this in people who work with children in very difficult circumstances, you see. I've been grieving uncontrollably lately. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. But let's look at the eclipses here, right? First of all, your sun is in the 9th house. You just had the eclipse in your 9th house. and Saturn is going through your ninth house. This is a time in your life when you're starting to reflect spirituality, right? Spirituality, philosophy, and not even, let's get to the fucking brass tacks. Why am I here? What does it all mean? Is there any meaning? These are the questions that you should be grappling with right now. Don't worry about the other stuff. Well, I mean, you're going to worry. That's fine. And that's cool. We can't totally control our emotions, obviously. That's not the point. The point is where we put our attention, because in the end, all we have is our attention. And where our attention goes, there we go too. And you see all the stuff in your ninth house is indicating that finding meaning in life, a resurrection of meaning, because you've probably been feeling a sense of meaninglessness or directionlessness, right? And we find our direction in life, right, through having a sense of meaning or motive or drive, right? And an underlying philosophy or ideology that gives us that sense of direction, or that puts it in the context where it has a purpose. It has meaning, you see? So this is very important for you, this time in your life. And I'm going through something similar in just a different way. But you see, these eclipses that you're getting done with now, they've all been in your 4th and 10th house, right? So this last eclipse we just had, you may find that you have to move. You may find that you're engaged in a big move, or I hate to say it, but it could do with your parents' health. Your parent. I know you don't talk to them, and that's probably a good thing. But I'm just saying that will be something that pops up probably. Now next summer, Saturn will go into your 10th house, which makes us again feel directionlessness, but in terms of career and our outward public direction, right? What's happening right now is needing to find a new worldview, or rather, that motivating force that gives you a sense of purpose. That's what you're working on, or rather, that's what the chart says you should be working on, And grief, is good, because when we're holding on to these heavy emotions all the time, we're not allowing ourselves to move forward, you see. Now, on top of all that, when Saturn goes into your 10th house, it'll make you feel like you're missing opportunities. But that's all good stuff in the end, because it's going to show you that life needs to go in a different direction. And guess what? You're going to have the last Aries eclipse in March. Let's look and see when that last eclipse is. That last Aries eclipse is March 29th, right? March 29th. So I'm trying not to start a cult. Yeah. Well, it doesn't even have to be a cult, right? Cults rely on subjugation, forcing people. There's a big sort of non-consensual thing with cults, right? And they're usually centered around a particular personality. Whereas, you could have a group, a spiritual group that doesn't necessarily have to have a hierarchy, but could be, because you see, when you study with groups, and I say this from experience, especially as someone who's sort of anti-group now, but you have a meeting of lots of minds. And when you have a group of minds talking together, you come up with all these amazing things that you perhaps wouldn't have come up with by yourself, right? Like me and Caleb talking has given me a lot of understanding and enlightenment, I suppose, around lots of other things, things I took for granted, right? So anyway, I'm just saying all this because you're in a very important time in your life, and I bet your life direction has already shifted dramatically. And if it hasn't, it certainly will after March. And you see how intimately connected all these things are? The eclipse coming up in Aries next year, and Saturn entering Aries right after that. So this is a big time in your life. The Church of Consent. Yeah, consent is my religion. Consent is my religion too, you know. And consent can be sexy. Like I can be in the midst of, you know, doing things. I can't be specific. But then I'll be like, is it okay if I do this? Or how would you like if I did that? And it can be very hot, but it's also asking for consent, you know. And I've learned that too over many liaisons. I love sex. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have, can't say that on here. I can't say that on Twitch, I don't think. So anyway, let's move on to the next person who is after. So Layla and then Quantum. So let's get to Quantum. And we can talk about, and then we'll talk, but I need Caleb's information. Or what, Caleb, are you just going to send me your chart and I can talk about it? I don't think you want your deets up there, right? Question mark. Anyway, so where's my dear Quantum? And we love Quantum. Quantum is one of my favorite people. Quantum is a big support. Quantum supports me so much, and I'm so grateful for Quantum. Thank you, baby. I really appreciate you. And Caleb, either put your information in the chat or send me your chart or something. Or wait, did I have your stuff? Is Caleb single? Well, I'm just saying. Caleb's pretty cool. I mean, if I'm like, what's the word? Lauding someone? Laud, right? Lauding. If I'm lauding someone, then, you know, there's a good reason. Oh, wait, hold on. And then I got Quantum. I got Quantum right now. No, Caleb, you need to send me your info so I can do you at the end. So Quantum, Pisces rising. This is sort of the quintessential read. I mean, the spotlight is on Pisces right now. Good for Caleb. Caleb's a Pisces. Caleb is also extremely ace. And yeah. Okay. I just need your information, Caleb, that's all. I'm an old lady. Would be a good time for me to purchase a decent used car. So for that, I'd look at two different things. I'd look at both the 8th house and I'd look at the 3rd house of transportation, right? So here's the fun part. I have given my chart details to Saturn Girl Multiple. You know I'm a fuck up. You know I'm a fuck up, Caleb. You know this. You know this. I guess I could try and backtrack. How do I search in conversation? I'm sorry. You know me. I point out that she has a wonderful habit of listening to my chart. At which point she accuses me of Pisces victimizing. I mean, yeah, when you're right, you're right. Yeah. So speaking of Pisces victimizing, you have Saturn going through your 1st house on the one hand, right? The spotlight is on Pisces. Pisces is getting a spanking, and not a fun one. Yes, I have ADHD, and it's no surprise. So, yes, I should have your shit, like, in here. I need to save it all. Okay. I think I've saved this in the past. I just have so many fucking pictures and shit. So, anyway. So. Saturn, yes. But then you also had the lunar eclipse here. And then again, Jupiter retrograde ruling your 1st house. So you're going through this whole process of self-discovery again, but it's not comfortable. It can feel quite morose. it can feel quite melancholy. We start thinking about death. And when the lunar eclipse happened, you probably got that sense of like, you know what? Life is short. Because a lot of us spiritual people or whatever, we take life for granted, ironically enough, because we have this misconception that we have reincarnation in all these lives. You don't fucking know. As far as you know, you have this life right now. And that's another thing that Hermeticism teaches, is that you can have these expansions of consciousness. You can reunite in a way, right? In this life. The word religion comes from Latin, religare, to bind together again, right? The word yoga in Sanskrit means union. This idea of reunion, it courses through the whole concept of religion and spirituality. You see? It sucks. The existential dread is real. I tend to bounce back and go through fits of peace and contentment. I mean, yeah, but you see, this is temporary because what this should be showing, it should be putting a bit of fear in you, unfortunately. It should be it should be making you aware that you're afraid of life. And we encounter that fear and we experience it through grappling with our fear of death. The fear of life is even more insidious than the fear of death because it holds us back, what? From being ourselves and expressing as much of that self as we can. And I can tell you that from experience, having gone through this first house Saturn transit, right? But you have the added potency, right, of the lunar eclipse from September there, which is bringing a whole big thing to a close. And then on top of that, the nodes in January are entering your first and seventh houses. That's the existential crisis, right? Saturn will pass out of there into your second house, which sucks. At least it sucks for me, you know. The whole money shit. But you'll start, especially after February, you're going to get this sense of purpose and meaning. Like, I need to start doing this. I need to start doing that. Maybe you get sort of what do they call that? A revival, you know, of your spiritual investigation or path or practice or whatever that fucking means to you, you know? But this is all about your relationship between yourself and others, because how we relate to ourselves affects how we relate to others and vice versa, you see? And that's what codependency comes from. It comes from a misunderstanding about ourselves and therefore looking for our own value through other people, right? And you have Saturn here in Virgo in your seventh house, which on the one hand, you know, can give us a desire for relationships, but also it can give us like this hyper independence that makes relationships so hard to have because we learn at an early age that we can't trust anyone, that everyone's out to get us, or that everyone will let us down, right? Like, remember the Nine Inch Nails song Hurt? And then Johnny Cash covered it, you know, I will let you down. I will make you hurt, right? And that's the sense of it. And look, Mars and Jupiter in the seventh house too. You know, so there's a lot of difficulty that comes up in your life around relationships. And this phase of your life for basically 2025 going into 2026 is going to have to deal with that a lot. And then guess what? Next year, September 21st, you will have a solar eclipse in your seventh house. So there's going to be big upheavals in your life that surround relationships and your identity. And you'll see your identity change significantly. And that's what you're in the process of experiencing now, right? And then you sort of go through this cocoon phase where you sort of assimilate all this stuff into practice in your daily life. You love your alone time, but I sure do miss companionship. It's been 3 years. So you may be in for a little bit more loneliness, but you see this phase of your life is ending. you know. And I would bet you dollars to donuts that you will meet someone new at the end of 2025. I bet you dollars to donuts. You have a night chart, so Venus is your best planet. Let's see, do I see anything in particular? I mean, this is kind of rough. Your peak periods in zodiacal releasing would be rough. They would be rough. I mean, Jupiter would mitigate them. We don't need to look at all that. But you see, relationships are being highlighted quite a bit. Because the Virgo shit. And the nodes moving into your first and seventh house. See, this is a big fucking deal for the next year and a half of your life. This is one of the biggest phases of this whole 19 years nodal cycle. You see, it takes the lunar nodes about 18.6 years to complete a revolution around the zodiac. And this is the beginning of the cycle for you, your first and seventh house. And this represents the emergence of your own sense of consciousness, right? We could think of it as development, but I mean, tons of people go through this shit and never appreciate or notice it, you know. We're usually on autopilot. But you see, this is sort of an awakening in you to your own existence. Like, this is what you're grappling with. And it's the relationship between self and other. Ultimately. You see? I mean, I hope that makes sense. There's other shit going on too. I mean, Jupiter's going through your fourth house, right? And for you, that's the 10th house. So that's also very significant, you know. I mean, Jupiter is going through your fourth house, but rules your 10th house. So everything feels sort of depressed in terms of your career and life direction, probably. And you're probably really down on yourself right now. But I promise you, things will get better, especially after February, because you'll feel that motivation again. But like I was saying, it'll still feel like you're stuck a little bit, like you're swimming against the current, and you'll feel like you're not making any progress. Like you might start I mean, you really should get on dating apps, you know. You're only 3 years older than me, right? You're only 3 years older than me. I'm 41, so you're probably 44, right? You're still young. I've dated women close to 60, you know. Forever young, I want to be forever young, right? Do you really want to live forever? Forever. I hate dating apps too, sweetheart. I do too. You know, what you could do, I mean, yeah, I'm shallow as fuck too. You know, I just swipe through women and couples mostly, like just based on their looks. And if we match, then I'll look at the other stuff. I know that sounds terrible, but the reason I get so lucky is if you throw enough darts, you know, eventually you hit some bullseyes, you know? So I just throw lots and lots of darts. But having, you know, a wonderful girlfriend now and everything, it's like I'm less motivated to be throwing all those darts. Like there's a couple couples like I see every once in a while, you know, that's cool. So anyway, I just want you to appreciate that. And yeah, I'm shallow as fuck too, but it doesn't have to be dating apps. Like here in Colorado, there's the Chris Brennan's astrology group, you know. I always thought like I should go there to meet women, you know, and guys, I guess, but mostly women. And I never did. I ended up meeting people elsewhere, but you find special interest groups, right? Find, you know, get out and meet people. Like go on Meetup and see like what groups are meeting in your area. You go to the record store and the library, concerts. Maybe I'll meet someone there. Yeah, but you have to talk to people and be available for people, right? Like, you know, sometimes I've had women come up to me at the roller rink and just start talking to me, and then it goes from there. You know, sometimes you have to take the bull by the horns, right? That cheeky bull, right? I mean, the point here is about action, you know, because Saturn's going to go retrograde I think it's November 15th. I think it's November 15th. And when that happens, that's a time to start working again. That's getting back to work. Work. Lilith, bless you, beautiful. Thank you so much. That's very sweet of you. Thank you, thank you. So I hope that was good, Quantum. We're gonna look at Caleb's chart right now, but I'm not gonna throw it up on the thing. What I will do though is at least just put his stuff in my software so I don't lose it again. I just gotta put it in here. Oh, excuse me. Forever young, I wanna be forever young. Do you really wanna live forever? Forever. Forever young, I wanna be forever young. Oh, I can throw your chart up there? Oh, so people can see the banality. You are so self-effacing, or self-defacing, rather. You silly Caleb. As brilliant as you are, you keep beating yourself up. That's the thing about Pisces. Why have friends when... I mean, so why have enemies when you have yourself? That's what I mean. You don't need enemies. Okay. 1:38 p.m. Forever young. I wanna be forever young. Oops. Okay, here we go. So, Leo rising. I love Leo risings. See, I'm a 1-degree Aquarius rising, and Caleb's rising is like almost exactly opposite mine. Well, I mean, it's like 154, so almost 2 degrees, you know? And Caleb's Mars is on my ascendant, which, you know, indicates some friendly rows here and there, you know? And it was having my beliefs shattered about 3 years ago that, you know, made me Saturn girl on the one hand, when Saturn was in my first house, you see, for quantum. So you can see some of the effects. And I came out as trans right after that, you see? So it was all a wonderful experience. And really, technically, Caleb's Venus is with an orb to be conjunct my ascendant, which is also, you know, a very close friendship, you know. And even though we live far away, I still consider them, still consider Caleb one of my big influences, you know, and a very, very dear friend. So, but Leo rising. See, this means that Saturn's going through the 8th house, which has to do with loss oftentimes, or a sense of having to endure loss. But loss for what purpose? See, loss is about letting things go and having to let things go that, you know, old, outmoded ideas of ourselves that we have to release, you know, and it can be very uncomfortable. I know, you know, I always talk a lot about me coming out as trans because it was a big deal, but there was a death there a little bit, you see? There was a bit of a death there. And I sort of had to let go of this idea of myself, which at the time I was so done with it, right? That it was a relief to start to let that go. But then you go through the awkward phase of sort of becoming again, you know? It's like a baby duckling, and or you know how they show baby horses and stuff, and they can barely stand up. They're all, I mean, that's kind of what we go through, you know? Other people don't even understand how to insult me properly. If I don't get it taken care of, no one will. Oh my goodness. So anyway, where's Pisces on? 8th house, duh. 8th house. So you see, everything's focused on this 8th house stuff. Now, there may be money problems, right? Because as you know, the 8th house is also debt, other people's stuff. We see investments, we see insurance. So oftentimes there's a loss of money, right? We see theft in the 8th house. People sometimes steal from us. Yes. And then the lunar eclipse was there. And typically that means like you need to stop the bleeding. Like where your resources perhaps you were a bit cavalier with, I don't know. Or maybe you borrowed a lot of money. Or maybe you became painfully aware suddenly that you had been bleeding, right? The other thing this is about is forgiveness, reconciliation with, deep schisms or resentment, right? Because it's Saturn. Saturn holds on to things. If there's a certain amount of resentment around a person or something else. Now, Saturn rules your seventh house also, which is relationships. So having Saturn go through this eighth house, on the one hand, is about loss and letting go. But it's also sort of related to your relationships with others. There may be something about relationships in general that you are letting go of, or you're coming to terms with and letting fall away into the background, you see? Because it is about loss. And this whole phase you're entering in your life, you're coming out of this sort of the reflective philosophical phase where you probably spent a lot of time considering what you believe and why, and grappling with your sense of existence. Now, with the nodes going into the second and eighth house, this is about the material consequences of that, you see, and letting go of a lot of that stuff. It's about letting go of, your old worldview. It's about letting go of your ideas about yourself on the one hand. Because the next phase of both of our lives, Caleb, because we're opposite rising signs, starting in 2026 is going to be about the first and seventh house. So we are going through a process of death, death and the reorganization of our money, right? Or of our relationship to possessions and our material stuff. It's because we've been so focused on the deeper or, the more existential questions in life, which are not separate from the material ones, as, we both talk about. However, it is about a reconciliation and appreciation of that stuff. That the spiritual life is nothing without the daily life. One of the gurus I used to follow, Gurdjieff, and then Nisargadatta said the same thing. If you can't handle your daily life, if you can't keep your daily life in order, you have no business doing anything spiritual. You have no business investigating what they call the path, right? You have no right engaging in these sort of finer and subtler type inquiries or quests if you can't handle your daily life and provide for yourself. And this is what I'm being confronted with to a certain extent. And I have an inkling here from your chart that this is also what you're being confronted with, sweetheart. So this is a very important time in our lives because we're being sort of set up or prepared, if we choose to accept it or allow it. We're being prepared for a rebirth. I hate to sound trite or say anything cliche. But that's really what this is leading to, because in 2026, you see, let me go back. Back to the future, Marty. We gotta go back to the future. See, for some reason, my Christopher Lloyd, Doc Brown impression sounds like Bernie Sanders. It's the 1%, the great state of Vermont. We've got to defeat Donald Trump, right? So we have a solar eclipse in Aquarius in February. That's a big fucking deal, of 2026, you see. That'll be your seventh house of relationships and my first house of self. So you see, throughout 2026, we're going to have this oscillation. And then you have a solar eclipse in August in your first house. There's this oscillation between relearning or re-understanding how we relate to ourselves and therefore to other people. So you may find in 2026 that you start to have a new view of relationships, and you may have a relationship you didn't even expect, right? And relationships take on so many different forms, Like, for example, Saturn is your seventh house ruler in the sixth house, If you were to have a partner, it would have to be a reliable, a close, someone who could share all that um, sixth house kind of um, pain and all that thing with you. But also, either you get to be subservient or they do. I mean, there might be sort of a tendency towards, submission or finding a certain amount of joy through serving someone else. Like that happens to people. I mean, you have the sun in the eighth house anyway, right? Which is all about this sort of stuff. Now, sometimes they end up being sort of like little therapists because everyone wants to tell them their secrets, you see. But on the other hand, it's grappling with their own sense of trauma and fear. And, it's like Jacob Marley from A Christmas Carol carrying around all these chains, all the chains from life, you know? And that's what the eighth house is about. It's the clearing house. It's about letting things go. And this is where Saturn and the lunar eclipse were just for you. Now, Jupiter going through the 11th house, being squared by all that, right? That could depress your fifth house of enjoyment. So it could very well feel like you're not able to have fun for a bit until after February. And then also your eighth house. So this is a time to take stock of your resources. And I fuck with Brooklyn accent, Doc Brown. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway. And the seventh house stuff, you have Venus and Mars there. And see, when Venus is conjunct Mars, for people who are AMAB or born with, assigned male at birth, it gives us more of a feminine demeanor or more of a feminine presentation. Even if it isn't explicit on the outside, there's definitely an aesthetic there. Or, people would get an impression of the femininity in some ways. But also when I see Venus in the seventh house, I think of a simp. I think of people who can simp for others. And that's why I say there may be a sense of finding joy in partly in taking care of someone else, you see. But Jupiter going through your 11th house is like reconnecting with friends, of course. You see, but when Jupiter goes into your 12th house next year, this is about healing. That'll be a year-long transit and a good one, right? I mean, it'll be qualitatively positive, although it will also be a bit confining and isolating because it indicates having to puzzle out all that stuff that you've been going through. And like I said, healing with Jupiter type stuff. It can take being in therapy, or it can represent starting a new therapy. So that's all wonderful stuff. And this will probably start next year. And I would imagine around summer of next year. But we'll see. Only time will tell, Oh, excuse me. Oh, goodness, I have a hiatal hernia. And then with the North Node in the 7th house, that's all about learning to perfect relationships as you get older. Now, they're not going to be perfect, but learning how to have fulfilling relationships in a way is part of your nodal destiny or expression. And it doesn't have to take the conventional presentation. It can be something totally unconventional. You see? It can be something totally unconventional in terms of relating. Right? There's many different types of relationships. And of course, Aquarius Venus is never normal. It can't be normal. That doesn't happen. But what does happen, and what, my girlfriend has the North Node in the 7th house. And learning what it means to have a partner or to be a partner, even if you don't have just one. But how to relate to people in a fulfilling way that doesn't undermine who you are. Being able to meet another person as equals in many ways, even if we have a submissive personality, but being able to meet as someone as a peer or on an even playing field, right? And to come to a relationship, at least with a modicum of a sense of self and a sense of confidence or strength and solidity in the sense of self, which is so against Pisces, right? Pisces is anything but solid, right? Sort of like, you know, putting water in a cup. What's that movie, The Shape of Water? You know? And it can be like that, but learning to have a solid, I mean, we're always in flux, but having a grounded foundation of the sense of oneself is the way to engage in these relationships. And I can tell you that from experience to a certain extent, you see. So it's, you know, you're going to be going through this whole crazy thing in 2026 especially. And right now, we're sort of being set up for that as we go into this new eclipse phase that starts in January. Now, the April eclipse, or sorry, the end of March eclipse next year will be in your ninth house, which represents a whole new shift in your worldview and in what you believe. It also could involve politics, you see. But then we enter into this phase here, which does start in January, where it's all about our possessions and letting go. The Shape of Water, which is the most Piscean romantic movie literally ever made. Yes, I love The Shape of Water, and I have nothing Piscean about me typically, but I love The Shape of Water. It was so romantic, and I really liked it. It was so good, and it was sad. It made me cry. It made me cry, so, but making me cry is like shooting fucking fish in a barrel. Like, it doesn't take a lot to make me cry. I cry at ASPCA commercials. You know what I mean? I mean, I cry at fucking commercials and shit. But anyway, Mars is about to go into your first house here starting in November. So just be careful about injuries and rushing around and all that sort of thing, because you have a day chart and Mars is one of your most difficult planets, you see. Yes, it's Piscean. Yeah. So just be aware of that, you know. Just be aware of injuries. Injuries. We are the crown goddamn royalty of Hurt So Good, right? Do you know the band Offspring? That's sort of before your time, Caleb, but you probably still know them, you know. The more you suffer, the more it shows you really care. Right? Yeah. You know, I'm just a sucker with no self-esteem. Oh, way, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Right? I'm aware. Well, good for you. You're aware. That's debatable. Anyway. See, and it's going to be your Jupiter return next year too. So this is very auspicious as well, right? So it's sort of part of your makeup in many ways. This idea of healing and becoming through this process of withdrawal, right? And by withdrawal, I mean sort of like a butterfly withdraws, right? A caterpillar. You know, it's like, I need to be away from you all. And it builds its own little wall around itself, so it can reflect on what the fuck it is and how it's becoming, you see? How it's becoming. So anyway, I mean, this is all important stuff. Mars, Venus, I talk about Venus, going through your fourth house, going to your fifth. Maybe more trailer trash by Modest Mouse. But you know, it really does depend on the kind of hurt I'm looking for. It happens more than I'd like to admit. I know I'm being used, but it's okay because I like the abuse. I'm dumb. I'm not a dweeb. I'm just a sucker with no self-esteem, right? And that's the big thing that we're going to be learning in this next eclipse phase. And I've gained a lot of confidence over the past 3 years, a whole shitload of confidence. But there's something that we're going to be awakening into, perhaps not comfortably, But 2026 is going to be a big fucking year for us. Do androids dream of electric sheep? Yes. The very obviously a replicant, Deckard, didn't understand why his wife would use the mood selector and set it to depressed. Yeah. Sweet sorrow. Sweet sorrow. The sweetness of sorrow, right? Like Shakespeare said, sweet sorrow, you know. There's a sweetness and a joy in melancholy sometimes. It's this weird contradiction, you know. I will put on songs about loss and breaking up that I know will make me cry because I want to feel it. And there's something I'm starting to get misty just talking about it, you know. Anyway. So, I don't know. There's always more to say, of course, but it's like I beat a dead horse here. I beat a dead horse here. Ah. Venus is going to go into your 5th house, though. I think October 15th. Wait, when is that? Is it October 15th? When is this? Maybe it's the 17th. Yeah, it's the 17th. The 17th. That's why I listen to shoegaze. Yeah, shoegaze. I love shoegaze. Yeah. Have you ever listened to My Bloody Valentine, Quantum? I love My Bloody Valentine. From like the early 90s, late 80s. I love My Bloody Valentine. They were like proto shoegaze, you know? And Smashing Pumpkins had a big influence on shoegaze in many ways too, you know? Like, yes, happy good, joy good, but the most gut-wrenchingly beautiful and world-shaking things I've ever seen experienced always come with at least a hint of melancholy. At a certain point, it's more honest. You own all of their records. That's so one. I love My Bloody Valentine. What's the one I love? Loveless? I love that Loveless, you know? Loveless is great. Archetypal shoegaze. You see, I was a big Tolkien fan, J.R.R. Tolkien, which is kind of like a bunch of fashy types are. But as a kid, you know, it was very interesting to me. And I read what's called the Silmarillion, which was his sort of mythos for the cosmos, for cosmic generation, right? Creation. And he talks about the prototypical, you know, elves or angels, right? The first created by God. And they created beautiful music, but one of the most beautiful ones was the melancholy, the sweetness of sorrow, which, oh God, I'm going to make myself fucking cry. Jesus. I'm fine crying in front of people. That's fine. I'm an exhibitionist. I just hate when my makeup runs, you know. But I love crying. Anyway, it just touches me what Caleb's on about. And that's the thing that strikes. I was talking to my girlfriend about liminal spaces the other day. And I started crying. It was just amazing because, anyway, I don't want to make myself cry again. But as Caleb often says, that emptiness, like Lao Tzu says, we shape clay into a pot, but it's the emptiness inside that holds what we want, right? We build 4 walls into a house, but it's the empty space inside that makes the home. We've always been carried, unbeknownst to us, in these liminal spaces, like a mother carries a baby in gestation, being nourished by the emptiness. And in the end, the only thing, ironically, that's substantial is emptiness. Nothing is independent. Nothing has an essential existence. And therefore, nothing is like our loving parent. Anyway. Not that I'm a giant fucking nerd or anything. I know. I always say I'm not a nerd, but then I'm into, like, nerdy fucking shit. When I say I'm not a nerd, I just mean I'm not one of those, like, basic trans girls who spends all day playing fucking video games and drinking Monster. You know? And I hate anime. Except for a couple, you know. I typically don't like anime. I don't wear cat ears and shit like that. You know what I mean? But you see, this is such important stuff. It really is, because it's the foundation, not just of astrology, but it's the foundation of our own existence. And if people ask, what are we here to do? What's the point of life? I'm like, you're fucking here. You're experiencing yourself as here, as being an I or a person, an identity, and you're here. That shit is the most amazing, mysterious. It's the most subtle and rare and beautiful and wonderful thing. And that's what we should really be investigating, is our own sense of existence. How is it that we are here? What is here? What is this thing I call I? Whence does it arise? You know, these are all potent, important questions because they have to do with emptiness. I talked the other day about this, Buddhist story about a monk who was explaining the concept of emptiness to a king, right? He pointed to a car and said, where's the car? I don't want to go through this all again from the other day. But in summation, the point was that the car isn't really there. It's an idea projected upon a bunch of parts, right? Which is very similar to what? A human being. The sense of I is sort of like a mind-born projection upon a confluence of thoughts, feelings, and sensations, right? And so like the Delphic oracle we talked about in the beginning, I know it's trite a bit, but it says, man, know thyself. And that's what knowing the self ultimately is. At least that's my idea of it for now, I've called it the mud before. There are times and places where, regardless of whether we want to be, we're stuck in the mud. The secret is the mud is my home, and I'm always happy to sit with visitors for a while. You see? Embrace the void, it loves you. I sit in that space sometimes. It's cold and yet comforting. I mean, I've heard it called isolated unity. Sounds like a very Piscean phrase, isolated unity. But, I mean, I think what Caleb is sort of getting at is the secret is the mud, The mud, anyway, it's the muddy middle ground, isn't it? It's the muddy middle ground. We oscillate between dualities, this and that and this, right? All these false dualities that are really interdependent and rely on each other for their existence in the first place. And what does that mean? It means they are inherently empty, that there's nothing inherent about them, because their existence is conditioned, meaning it's dependent on other things, right? And so the mud is that middle ground between that relationship, right? What hangs out in the in-between spaces. And what is it that they have in common? It's emptiness. And so the emptiness, which is in a way the inherent quality of something, isn't it? If you want to nothing has inherent quality. But apparently, logically it seems to me, and Caleb, you can dispute this with me, but it seems like emptiness is an inherent quality then. As much as there can be inherent qualities, right? Emptiness is that. And so there is the liminal space. There's the mud to hang out in, right? And it can feel cold because it's not personal. Because there's no person to latch on to. Like you said, there's visitors for a while. There's visitors. Like we enter that space. And now I'm going to sound mystical and everything, but to me, the whole point of self-realization is to be that space. Which is to be nothing. To be no one. Going nowhere. Not doing a goddamn thing. Physicists can model the absence of a particle in a lattice. as a kind of quasi-particle that is simply the absence of the other particles of the lattice. So what is that? It means nothing is a real thing. Or, I mean, that's what I'm reading there. But nothing is a real thing. Like Joe Rogan says, that's a real thing. I can't stand that, man. As the lattice shifts, moves, and adjusts, they can model this quasi-particle moving around. I mean, that's pretty amazing, right? The absence of a particle. There was something I was going to say. There was something I was going to say about that. Being nothing. Being nothing, right? And, like Nagarjuna said, he said the middle way is the space between being and non-being, existence and non-existence. So in a way, emptiness and nothing are the resolution of those, right? This is what I was thinking, Caleb. Nisargadatta, right? Nisargadatta, who you know I'm very smitten on. Nisargadatta had a student talking to him, and he asked that student, he said, get rid of name and form and desire, and what are you left with? And the student says, nothing, nothingness. And Nisargadatta says, yes, only the void remains, but the void is filled to the brim. It's the eternal potential as consciousness is the eternal actual. Now, I don't know if anything is eternal, but I think what he was getting at is sort of what you're talking about to a certain extent. You know, that these things are interrelated. But in the end, the only conditionless aspect of any of it is nothing. It's the emptiness, right? They're so close, like it's watching someone trying to sound something out on the tips of their tongue. They're right there. Yeah, and this is probably something that, is related. I'm just guessing, because I follow this neuroscientist who does a bunch of research on consciousness in Britain. His name is Dr. Anil Seth. But I think what you're talking about can sort of lead us into understanding consciousness itself a bit more. You see? Oh my gosh, I've gone for 3 hours. I've just literally talked for 3 fucking hours. I am Gemini's final form. I literally talked for 3 fucking hours. This is wild. That was a great conversation, though, at the end. I definitely enjoyed that. Because the most interesting thing to me in the whole world is nothing. Nothing. No thing. Right? No thing. Anyway, I've gone for 3 hours. I love you all. Please like the stream, subscribe to my channel, all that fun stuff. I wish I'd said that earlier. You know, like, get your friends to come back, because like I said, I'm bleeding money and I need help. Like, YouTube is paying me, a little bit. I do readings, but not enough, right? I do have members, and I have some patrons here and there. My Jupiter's in the 11th house, right? So please, please, please. I hate to be a begging bitch, but, help a girl out. I'm a single parent, Anyway. This is definitely my favorite episode you've ever done. I'm so glad you think so, because this is the shit I would rather talk about. And I feel like I get pigeonholed into doing motherfuckers' readings the whole time. And then I feel obligated to get to everyone. I would rather go off on philosophical discussions that put all the meaning of this stuff in context, especially for people who are engaged in spiritual work. Because this, it gives them an example, or, it shows us that we're not alone. And the stuff we've been thinking about and talking about together, that we come into new understanding as we do all that shit. I might want to do just like members only streams where we talk about this stuff and we don't have to feel obligated to sit and do everyone's fucking chart the whole time. Because that gets tedious and exhausting, especially when people have the same goddamn rising signs. And it's like, I just said all this stuff a second ago. Because typically I'm doing house rulers when I'm doing these live readings. And it's going by house rulers that makes it the most accurate and practical, to be honest with you. So, thank you, thank you. I love you, I love you. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. I'm going to do an adult stream after this. So, I got to put my